Bienvenido al curso JavaScript por parte de este chino.
So this will round to 289 cents. And finally, we'll convert this back to dollars at the end by dividing by 100. If we press enter, that's how we round this calculation to get the exact number on the page. So to summarize, we first calculate the result in cents, and then we round this to the nearest cent, and then at the end, we convert back to dollars. Again, don't worry, you don't have to be good at math to learn JavaScript. These examples are just for learning. Almost all the math we do in JavaScript is more
Numbers
simple.
and math.
In JavaScript, there are actually 3 ways to create a string. The first way is to use single quotes, which we already learned. For example, we can type, to create an element, we start with a less than symbol, and then the element name, like a button, and then the greater than symbol. And we say it wouldn't work, because JavaScript thinks that this entire line is one instruction.
Las variables let es una variable que puede cambiar. Las cons es solamente una variable que no va a cambiar, ¿cachai?
So we need semicolons to separate different instructions in JavaScript. If we save, everything goes back to normal. And we're going to display this message again. So we can actually just copy this code. So we'll select it, and then right-click, and copy, and then here, right-click, and paste. Now if we save, and click the Add to Cart button,
Está haciendo un counter.
we'll see that it increased the quantity by 1, and displayed the updated quantity in the console. Let's press it again to make sure it works. So it increases it by 1 again, and then displays it in the console. So that's basically how the cart quantity feature works in the final project. First, we need a variable to save the quantity, and then when we click a button, we're going to update the quantity.
Pinochet y
So now, let's make the rest of these buttons interactive. Feel free to pause the video if you want to try it yourself. Paper, scissors game. And if we click this link, it will take us to the final version of this game. So in this game, we can pick a move, and then the computer will pick a random move, and it will show us, including inside the if statement. And then inside the if statement, instead of creating a new variable, we're just going to save the move inside this variable up here, because we can access this variable anywhere else in the code, called global variables. If we save, and now click the scissors button, everything is working again, because this code above can now access this variable. Now let's press OK, and let's use this function to reuse this code. So we'll scroll up
No
to
tengo
the paper
depresión.
button, and now instead of all this code again, we're just going to remove it and call
Presión
the function.
atmosférica.
Computer move, open bracket, close bracket, semicolon, and also with the rock button. We'll select all this code and remove it and just call the function. Pick computer move, brackets and semicolon. Now if we save and click the rock button, it works just like before. We'll press OK and click the paper button. It also works just like before. So as you can see, functions let us reuse code, and they make our code a lot cleaner by removing all the duplication that we had. Another benefit of removing duplication is that before, if we ever wanted to update the code for picking a computer move, we had to update it in 3 places. Actually, a function. You can tell it's a function because of the round brackets, and between the brackets, we put a string.
Bueno, esta wea
Let's add this button in our project.
es
So we'll scroll up,
un level muy
and inside
penca.
the HTML, we'll add a button.
Alguien que está
We have
recién
an even shorter
empezando.
shortcut for doing this. So notice here that this code basically sets a default value if the score doesn't exist. In the
Gracias
Booleans
por la
lesson, we learned a
rosa.
technique called the default operator, which is exactly what we need here. So on this line, we can remove the semicolon and type or, and then a default value. So we want our default value to be this.
Ya saben, cabros, síganme en Instagram, Spotify, música para no escuchar, también proyecto secundario, YouTube Music.
Object. So
Sigamos.
let's select it, and then right-click, copy,
Den like y
and then here,
apoyen, por favor.
right-click, and paste. And I'll select these lines, and press Shift-Tab to remove an indent. And I'll add a semicolon back at the end. So the way that the default operator works is that if the left side is truthy, so in this case we have a score, then
Fueron
we'll use the
años
left side.
aprendiendo inglés.
If the left side is falsy, or in this case the score is null, then we will use the right side as a default value. So this does the same thing as this code below, but it's just a shortcut. So now let's comment out this code using /star, and at the bottom
Debe,
//.
chico.
So we'll leave it here just for reference, and then save. And if we click reset score again, and refresh, and play the game, it will still work. So this is a perfect situation to use the default operator to simplify our code. So let's press OK. And that's all we're going to do for this project in this lesson. Now let's move on and learn more details about objects. The first thing we'll learn is the value null. So null is one of the falsy values in JavaScript.
El
It's similar
null
to the
es
value
nada.
undefined. They both represent that something doesn't have a value. So what's the difference between null and undefined? We use null when
Null.
we intentionally want something to be empty. For example,
Algo vacío.
in the previous lesson, we learned that if a function has parameters, we can give the parameter a default value.
No sé
If the
qué
parameter
pasó,
is
miran.
undefined, it will use the default value. However,
Estoy
if we set this parameter
desconectado
to
de la
null,
Matrix.
it will not use the default value, and it will just use null. So null means we intentionally want something to be empty. In most cases, though, null and undefined work the same way. Okay, so the next detail about objects we're going to learn is called auto-boxing. Let's go back to
¿Qué
objects.html
estorbes?
and open the tab for this file. And let's also comment out the previous code so our console doesn't get too messy. So /star, and at the bottom, // and save.
¿Qué estorbe?
So let's scroll down. We learned in this lesson that objects can have properties and methods. So you might be surprised to learn that other values also have properties and methods. For example, at
Me
the bottom,
perdí la
we're going to
explicación
type
del weón.
console.log, the string hello,
Donde está
null.
poniéndole.
And at the bottom, if we try to access any property on null, it will give us an
¿Cuál es la
error. So that's
diferencia
what we see
entre
here.
null y undefined?
Brackets, because this is a method or a function saved inside the
Me
object,
perdí.
equal to the
Cagué.
null.
Cagué.
So null means we intentionally
Ah,
want something to be empty. In most cases, though, null and undefined work the same way. Okay. So the
¿qué?
next detail about objects we're going to learn is called auto-boxing. Let's go back to
Dijo que era lo
objects.html.
mismo. Buena. No dijo que
In this
funcionaba de
lesson, we're going
diferente
to learn
forma.
one of the most important features of JavaScript, called the document object model, or the DOM. And we're going to use the DOM to improve our rock, paper, scissors project. So first,
Favorito
we'll create a new
es.
file for this lesson. Let's go to our code editor and click this icon to show our file.
Mi juego favorito es. ¿Cómo se llama esta wea? Zelda.
Files, and then click this icon
Pero
to
hace
create a
tiempo
new
que no
file.
juego.
And we'll name this file 09-dom.html and press enter. Next, let's copy objects.html this lesson. To open these projects, we'll go to our browser and create a new tab at the top. And here, we'll type supersimple.dev/projects/dom and press enter. On this page, we'll be working on 3 projects: the YouTube subscribe button, the rock, paper, scissors project we've been working on for the last few lessons, and this Amazon shipping calculator. And you'll notice that these projects modify the web page.
Estoy
So we're
cachando
going to
que
be using the DOM to
JavaScript es
create
súper
these projects.
fácil.
And in the next lesson,
O sea, yo ya sé todo esto de JavaScript.
we're going to use CSS to style these
Me
projects
tiré una
and make them
paja.
look nice. And you can preview that by clicking here. So using CSS, we can make the subscribe button look like the actual subscribe button on YouTube. And if we click this link to see the rock, paper, scissors game, the function update, score, element, and brackets. This will run all the code inside the function, so it does the same thing as before, except we can reuse the code. So let's scroll back up. And instead of typing out all this code again, we can just use our function. Update, score,
Síganme
element,
los que no me sigan,
brackets.
cabrón.
That the cost is a string. So this is actually not a number, it is a string. That's why it's not doing math. So remember from the strings lesson, when we add a string with a
tengo
number,
dinero.
JavaScript will automatically convert this number into a string and combine them together. That's why it just combines 25 and 10 here. This is called type coercion.
Que se equivoque. Que explorar el mundo.
So whenever we get a value from the DOM like this, the value will be a string. So in order to do math, we have to manually convert the string into a number. To do that, JavaScript has a built-in function called number. So before this code, we're going to type capital N number.
Se
Open brackets
volan
and close brackets.
Rails
So the number function takes whatever's between the brackets and manually converts it into
y
a number.
JavaScript.
So now if we save and we type 25
Igual he programado en Python y en Java.
press calculate,
Y en C++, pero muy poco.
the cost is now a number, and it will do the math properly and give us 35. So remember, whenever we get a value from the DOM, the value will be a string. So if we want to do math with it, we have to manually convert this value into a number first. So now let's remove the console.logs that we used to figure out this problem. And save. Let's make this match our final design. So it's we just organize our code better. Another feature of the source attribute is that it also uses file. And this time, we'll go to our scripts folder.
Vamos a
And
usar
Windows, so
right.
we can see the console.
Ya
This loop
hemos
makes the
avanzado
computer count
8
from
horas
1 to 5.
de una.
So let's go over this code step by step to make sure we understand how it works. First, we create a variable I, and we make it equal to 1. And then we do a loop. So if this condition is true, the computer will keep running this code over and over again. So the first time it loops, I equals 1, and then it
Un
displays
loop.
1 in the console.
Ya, esa wea I es igual a 1. Si acá no estuviera la línea 38, esta wea correría infinito.
And then we increase I to 2. 150 pixels and 100 pixels. Using the remainder operator, which looks like this. So to check if a number is divisible by
Estos
3,
son
we
otros
can check
tipos
if
de
the remainder is
loops
0.
para que vean.
So here, we're going to replace this with I remainder 3, and we'll check if the remainder
Acá, si lo que sobra de I es 1, sigue. Si no, sigue. Y cuando es igual a 8, este es for terminal.
is equal to 0. If we save, this will skip 3, and here, instead of the lesson 10 file, we'll load the lesson 12 JavaScript file. Let's save, and we'll open this in the browser by right-clicking, open, and on-click attribute. So let's go back into our projects and switch to using add event listener. We'll start with the rock, paper, scissors project. So we'll open our files, and we'll open 12 rock, paper, scissors, and click here and save, and we'll scroll up to 12 rock, paper, scissors.js, and for the video, I'll drag this down to the bottom, and I'll hide the files for now, and then rearrange the windows, and finally open the tab for this file. Now let's go to the HTML. We'll scroll up to these
Pero
move
esto ya
buttons.
lo aprendí.
Before we can do that, we
chequeando
need
si
to
te
add
sirve.
JavaScript to this. comma, and a rating property, colon, an object. We have
Sé
these
que iba a hacer cosas más
and
difíciles
remove the
este
new lines
tipo, weón.
and save. So now let's go into our project. We'll write
Estas cosas las sé. O sea, no estoy diciendo que
time that this causes naming conflicts is if we import this
llevo
variable
años
and we have
trabajando.
another variable named cart inside
La
this file like
experiencia
this.
del trabajo, weón, te
So
deja
this will again create a naming
terrible
conflict.
brígido.
If I save this, the website is being displayed. So that's how we generate all the HTML for this section by clicking the top left, date and time. The second thing we need to do is to do calculations with the date. So we're going to get those values out of the data attributes by using const, and let's use the shorthand property here for practice, curly brackets equals the element dot data set. And then out of the data attributes, we're going to get the product ID, comma.
Mira, acá hay un otro tipo de loop que es el for each element.
As well as the delivery. And we'll go to the data folder, dot slash data slash, and products.js. Next, we're going to learn how to use a testing framework to write automated tests. So in here,
Testing de nuevo,
at the bottom of this function, right here, we have this list of products. So let's actually scroll down to the third product, which is, okay, don't worry if classes are a bit confusing at first. Just remember that object-oriented programming means organizing our code into objects from classes. So for now, let's save this code. And then down here, we console.log product1. So let's take a look at it in our console. So we'll open the console. And now we can see that we created a product object. So this is clothing. We're going to display the size chart link on the page. In this lesson, we're going to learn about backend. And this will prepare you for the next step after finishing this course. First of all, what is backend? A backend is just another computer that manages the data of a website. For example, in our Amazon project, we created this website where we can pick which products we want.
El frontend
But how
y
does
el
Amazon,
backend.
the company, know which? The headers tab gives us details /apple.jpg and press enter. It will get back the same image as before, except the browser will display it as an actual image. Scroll up to data/products.js, and I'm going to drag this file to the top so we can see the code side by side. And I'll scroll down to the HTTP request, which is right here. And remember that we use an event listener to wait for the response to come back. Once the response is loaded, we're going to run this function. So basically, we want to run all of this code at the bottom of this event listener. Next, we're going to learn promises, which are a better way to handle asynchronous code. Promises are similar to Jasmine's done function that we just learned. They let us wait for
Aquí ya se puso un poco más
some asynchronous code to finish before
difícil
going
a
to the
las
next step.
20 horas.
So now let's create our first promise. We're going to open our code, and on the left, we're going to go to checkout.js.
¿Cómo avanzamos?
And in here, at the top, we're going to practice promises. Promise is a class. So we're going to type the code new, capital P, promise, and
Las promesas son cuando uno pide una weá y espera algo, ¿cachai? Eso es. Gracias, Jan, por las rosas.
brackets to create a new promise object. Now inside these brackets, we're going to give it a function. So brackets, arrow, and curly brackets. So that's just how promises are designed. It's a built-in class, and when we create a promise, we need to give it a function.
Esa es una
So when we
función.
create this promise, it's going to run this function immediately.
Esta weá da una función.
So inside here, let's console.log the string promise to show that it runs immediately. So we'll save this file, and then go to the website, and we'll open the tab for our project. And I'm going to zoom out a bit by pressing Control or Command minus, and then open the console. Right-click, inspect, and the console. And you'll see a log promise. So when we create a promise, it runs this inner function immediately. Now this inner function gets a parameter called resolve. And resolve is a function, and it works very similar to Jasmine's done function. So resolve lets us control when to go to the next step. For example, let's add some asynchronous code into this promise. We'll remove the console.log, and we're going to run load products, which is asynchronous. So here we'll type load products and brackets. And now we're going to give load products a callback function, like we did down here. Brackets, arrow, and curly brackets. So it will run this function after load products is finished. Once this is finished, we want to go to the next step. So here we're going to call resolve. So resolve and brackets. So you can see that the syntax here is very similar to Jasmine's done function. We run some asynchronous code, and then we wait for it to finish, and then we call resolve to go to the next.
Ah, ya. Resolve. Se fue la vuelta, weá. Vamos a correr dentro de Resolve los add products. Entonces cuando los add products terminen, vamos a correrlos.
Now, what is the next step to this promise? So you might think that this code down here is the next step. However, a promise actually creates a separate line of code, or a separate thread of code. So here, these two.
Mi promise, primero ejecuta los promises, después resolve. No, se va a los add products. Entonces resolve. Next step. Primero hace el resolve y después carga los productos Y esta cuestión después hace el render order summary, que es el que está acá, y el render premise summary.
Two groups of code are sort of running at the same time. Feel free to pause the video to get a longer look at this diagram. The reason promises are designed this way is it allows JavaScript to do multiple
Hola,
things at the
estamos
same time.
programando, Fran, ¿qué tal?
So when the promise finishes, it can do a next step. But this next step is going to be separate from the rest of the code. It sort of does the next step on the side. So right now, this promise creates a separate thread of code. But this separate thread doesn't actually have a next step. So we're going to add one. To add a next step to a promise, at the end, we're going to use a method called .then and brackets. And we need to give .then a function. So we're going to type brackets, arrow, and curly brackets. And inside here, let's just console.log the string next step. So first, we run this asynchronous code, and then we wait for it to finish, and then we run resolve. And resolve makes it go to the next step. To make this easier to see in the console, let's actually add some console.logs to track the progress of this code. So at the top, let's console.log the string start promise. And then in here, let's console.log the string finished loading. And we'll also comment out the code that we had before. So we'll type /* and at the bottom, //. And now let's save and check our console. So let's go through this step by step. First, we start the promise, which we see here, and then we call load products, which we see here. Once the products are finished loading, it's going to run this function, and then we'll display finish loading, and then we're going to call resolve, which goes to the next step, which runs this function, and we display next.
Cuando termine toda esa mierda la promesa, va al next steps.
So resolve lets us control when to go to the next step. In this case, we waited until load products was finished, and then we called resolve to go to the next step. So that's how promises work. They let us split our code into separate steps, and then we can wait for one step to finish before going to the next step. Now that we understand promises, let's convert the code that we had before from a callback to using a promise. So first, let's remove these console.logs to make our code a little easier to read. Now, in our previous code, we actually had two steps. The first step is to call load products. And then once this is finished, the second step is to call render order summary and render payment summary. And in our promise, we have the same thing. Our first step is load products. Once this is finished, we're going to call resolve and then go to the second step. So we're just going to copy this second step into the second step up here. So we'll select this code and then right click, copy, and in .then, we're going to right click and paste. And now let's save and let's check the web page. So we'll open the project and you can see that everything is loading correctly. So this promise does the same thing as a callback that we had before. Both of them have two steps. The first step is to load the products, and then we wait for the products to finish loading, and then we do the second step, which is to render the page. So now you might be wondering, why do we use promises? It looks like it's more work and more code than just using a callback. So callbacks have a big problem, which is multiple callbacks cause a lot of nesting. Nesting means having code inside code, like this. To see why this is a problem, let's say that we want to load the cart from the backend as well. I actually set up a URL path that we can use to practice, called /cart. So first, let's go into products.js, and we're going to copy load products and change it to load the cart. So we'll select this function, and then right-click, copy, and let's open cart.js, since we're going to load the cart from the backend. And let's scroll down to the bottom. And here, we'll right-click and paste that code. And now, instead of loading the products, let's load the cart from the backend. So first, let's rename this function to load C cart. And the first thing we need to change is the URL path. So instead of loading /products, we're going to load
Denle like, por
/cart
favor,
from my
denle
backend.
like.
So normally, when we load /cart, the
Suscríbanse.
backend will give us a cart array. However, since we're just practicing, my backend will just give us some text when we load /cart. Next, we don't need this products code anymore, so we can select it and then delete it. And instead, let's just console.log brackets, and we'll just display the response that.
Suscríbanse. Escuchen mi música en Spotify, YouTube Music. Wow.